One of the things that you have in your hands is this book. This is the color version. And the cover is meaningful. When we work with students, no matter who the student is, no matter what their age is, no matter whether they have a disability or not, there are three things that I have found are absolutely critical. First of all, they have to have hope. They have to think about their future optimistically. If they don't have any hope, why would I bother setting a plan for the rest of my life? The second thing they have to have is confidence. If I don't believe I can do anything, then why would I try? And why would I plan for a future where I can't do anything? And the third thing is they have to have trust in resources. Sometimes those resources are financial resources. Sometimes they're having a support group that will help them. They need their parents, they need their families, they need caring adults in their lives. And sometimes they just need some community resources to help them along. But if we don't have hope, confidence, and trust in resources, why would anybody develop a plan for their future? And so I think the whole purpose of transition when we think about youth is to think about transition in the context of how do we instill that hope? How do we instill that confidence in themselves? How do we help them develop skill sets so they know they can become confident and capable of making choices? And how do we help them find places where they've got those resources that they need? And today we are going to cover the booklet. The booklet was developed 2 or 3 years ago, and it's been updated every year because the federal government said the state had to have a state performance plan, and there were elements in transition that had to be included. And we were doing institutes across the state, and we wanted to have something that was a common tool so that no matter where we went, people got the same information around transition. And so that's how this booklet evolved. It is available for you to download for free on the website, catransitionalliance.org. And it also is, you can purchase it bound and everything from the Alliance, or you can print it off yourself. So anyway, but the booklet is available. And we have a real challenge, to be real honest, and it's not specific just to people with disabilities, because for the last 15 to 20 years, there has been some tracking, and we found out that there is this developmental phase, and it's called emerging adulthood. And people are choosing, youth are choosing to not achieve those traditional adult milestones the same rate that they had in the past. And it's easy to say, oh, it must be the economy, that's why kids are living in our basement, but it's not the economy. It's been going on for a long time. There are 5 adult milestones. And I'm an adult if I finish school, I enter a career, I live independently, I am financially independent, and I am starting a family, or I'm involved with a family. Those are the 5 adult milestones. And it used to be that 3 out of 5 we normally achieved by the time we were about 25, 26. Now it's closer to 35 and 40. So as we say, okay, we're going to have everybody develop that transition plan so that you're ready to enter adulthood at age 18, it's just not developmentally the way things are now. So, and that's true for all kids, not just students with disabilities. So it's a real challenge because our expectations versus their actions, there seems to be, and if anybody's got a way to cure that emerging adulthood, I need some lessons. I've got kids that are not financially independent yet. But anyway, and tonight we're going to go over the booklet and we're going to share some information. We're going to talk a little bit about resources. And every topic in this booklet could be a 2-day workshop. So we're really going to cut to the surface of things, and we hope that we delve enough so you have some ideas by the time you leave on where to get resources or what's going on, okay? My background when I was working, I'm retired, but when I was working for the Shasta County Office of Education, I was the director of School to Career, and I was the person who was doing the workability program and working in transition for students with disabilities. And so I just married the two of them. And so I come at it from a slightly different perspective, and I don't necessarily look just to special ed for special ed resources. I look for generic resources that have universal design that everybody can use. So you know that bias now coming in. Secondary transition. Transitioning out of high school is something that's kind of a rite of passage for all youth. And then frankly, there are lots of points in transition. We transition from babyhood to toddlerhood. We transition from preschool to kindergarten. We transition from 8th grade into high school. We transition from high school into life after high school. And we transition from working into retirement. So at every stage of the game, we're going through transition. And we really hope that we can do it so that we can work with students so they are ready to achieve those adult roles. We want every student to be a productive worker that's happy with the kind of work they do. We want every student to be a responsible family member. We want every student to be a contributing member of their community. And we want every student to see that they are a lifelong learner. And with all the changes going on constantly with technology and with everything going on in our lives, that lifelong learning is absolutely critical, because nobody is going to get a job that stays the same for 20 or 30 years anymore. So change is the norm. And this is kind of a map for transition after high school. Some people are looking and saying, wow, am I ready? Do I have the information I need? Do I have the confidence? And some people are eligible for some case management and some social kinds of services to help them. Some of those services might be through the regional center, they might be through mental health, they might be through the Department of Rehabilitation, and others need some help. They have a disability, they're kind of struggling to find a job and go to school, and they need to learn how to advocate for themselves. And for students that are in that category, we've got the colleges have disability student service programs. We have the one-stop system to help people find jobs. We have the Department of Rehabilitation. You're possibly going to be involved with social services in your community. And we have programs like manpower programs like Job Corps. And then we have some students that say, you know what, I've got a plan. And I have gone through school, and I've taken the classes. I know I want to be a welder. I got my welding certificate, and I'm good to go. They're few and far between, but they do exist. And the expectations are changing for everyone. Every student, every school district, everybody is looking at college and career readiness. We're looking at the Common Core standards. We're looking at the need to document student outcomes. And we are also looking at how many students go to work and how many students continue their education beyond high school. We have an emerging issue called Employment First. And Employment First says everybody, regardless of their disability, has the right and the responsibility to work if they can. And that is making huge shifts in adult services, and it's really challenging us to think about people differently too. Our current statistics. These are national statistics. California statistics are within 1 or 2 points of the national statistics. And so the national statistics tell us that in July 2014, in terms of labor force participation, 19.4% of people with disabilities were working that were of working age, adults. And people without disabilities were at 69.4%. So we have got a long way to go to work with businesses, to work with the community, and to find new ways to prepare people for employment. The unemployment rate for people with disabilities is 12%, and people without disabilities is 6%. And so again, and these are people, unemployment is a tricky thing, because what unemployment says is whether or not you've had unemployment benefits and you're no longer receiving unemployment benefits. So those are a little bit inconsistent, but The thing to really look at is the labor force participation. And there are a lot of reasons that people work. Every one of us can sit there and reflect on what we do that makes us feel good. And the number one reason that people work is to feel good about ourselves. The second one is to be around other people, to have that social opportunity. The third one is to continue to learn. The fourth one is to stay physically active. And the last one has to do with pay. So we can be very satisfied if those other things are met. And we're pretty grouchy if we have a job and none of those other things are met, but the pay's okay. So, all right. We have been going through a process where we have had expectations, and expectations basically have been based on disability to some degree. The focus on employment for all, including youth with disabilities, and especially those youth with disabilities that we didn't perceive would go to work, is shifting. And we need to really prepare them for integrated, competitive employment. And that puts a responsibility on us. We need to examine our own expectations. We really need to take a look at how going to work is taking a risk. It's taking a risk for the individual. The family is taking a risk. There's a real fear factor. What if they get a job and they hate it? What if they really can't find a job? What's that going to do to Social Security benefits? All of those things play a role in how we approach getting ready to work. The other thing is, we need to look at new ways to work with people to provide adequate support and encouragement for successful employment. We really need to look at having natural supports in the workplace. We need to improve the assessment procedures. We need to take a look at new ways to engage post-secondary education and business. We need to identify new pathways to employment. And we really need to look at entrepreneurship. And finally, everybody needs role models that you can say, I want to be like that person. We need to find role models for our youth with disabilities that show them that people with disabilities do work. When we do these things, we have a better chance of helping them. We have a program in the North State, and they started a little business, and they became vendorized by the regional center. It was a combination of the regional center and the school district and some adult services all getting together. And they decided they were going to sell some food in this boutique. And the health department came in and said, you've got to have food handlers permits. And the response to that was, these people have disabilities. They can't get a permit. And the answer was, well, then don't sell food, because you have to have a food handler's permit to do what you're going to do. That's the rule. And so they re-examined the whole thing, and you know what they found out? Every single employee earned the food handler's permit. And what it did was wake them up to how much of the limitation was imposed by our expectations. And when they looked at opportunities, they found out that a lot of their students that were in this program were not receiving a high school diploma. They were getting a certificate of completion. Well, the high school diploma is a ticket to go somewhere. It's a ticket to say I qualify for financial aid at college. It's a ticket to go to work because employment applications require high school diplomas. What were we giving individuals who were getting the certificate of completion? So this program started really taking a hard look at that, and now they're doing OSHA certifications, they're doing customer service certifications, they're doing food handler certifications, because those are the things that are going to be the ticket for individuals who don't have the diploma. So when we say that we are having to shift our expectations, we really need to be thinking how much of a limitation is our expectation imposing on the people that we're trying to help. And it's scary. It is a risk, but it's a risk that pays off. You get all the wonderful satisfaction of working. So when we talk about this, we're really talking about shifting expectations, and it means that we need to think differently. we need to make decisions, not by agencies and families, but by the young people, the self-directed decision-making with some help and guidance. And all kids need that. I've got proof at my house, too. Education, day programs and special ed, or inclusive opportunities. When we talk about recreation, do we need a segregated program, or do we participate in integrated social recreational opportunities in the community? I saw a great cartoon the other day that said, you might want to come on the night we have the special needs people bowling. And the reaction was, I have a 180 score. I think I can bowl. And so it was like, oh, okay. Employment, sheltered work, or work and volunteer in integrated settings. Do we want to live at home in an institution or a group home, or do we want that flexibility of living in our community, in a house or a condo or an apartment or with a roommate or getting some support? And relationships. Do we want to be absolutely 100% dependent on paid staff and families, or do we want to think about friends and neighbors and spouses that provide that support? So now we're talking about secondary transition from the educational perspective. And this is what the law says. The law says that secondary transition is a coordinated set of activities for a child with a disability that is designed within a results-oriented process that is focused on improving the academic and functional achievement of a child with a disability that facilitates movement from school to post-school activities. So it's action-oriented, it's focused on that outcome and how to prepare them to achieve that goal. It includes post-secondary education, vocational education, integrated employment, continuing and adult education, adult services, independent living, and community participation. It's based on the individual's needs, the individual's preferences, and it's taking into account their strengths and interests, and includes instruction, related services, community experiences, the development of employment, and post-school living objectives, and if appropriate, the acquisition of daily living skills if needed, and a functional vocational evaluation. Well, in your book, I think on the very last page, you've got this chart. Because I really wonder who doesn't need independent living skills. And as you look at this chart, do you know anybody that doesn't need to know how to handle their money? Do you know anybody that doesn't need to know their way around their community? Do you know anybody that doesn't need to know how to manage being at home, taking care of themselves and everything? So I would argue that the law says if needed, but reality says it's needed. And this is how you construct an IEP. The book doesn't go in this order, but we'll talk about this. So the first thing you're supposed to do is an annual age-appropriate assessment. And I do mean annual. When we talk to students and they tell us what their goals are, there is a good possibility that the goal might change. They might find out they really hate doing dishes. They might find out they tried something and they didn't like it. And as people mature, their range of experience expands, the opportunity to do things and see if they like them or not expands. So it's critical we have the assessment. The assessment process should drive the post-secondary goals, the educational goals, the employment goals, and the independent living goals. There should be a coordinated set of activities relevant to each of those goals areas. There should be measurable annual goal statements listed on the IEP. There should be a course of study defined, and there should be, and it should all lead to the post-secondary outcomes, preferably close-like to the goals, to the post-secondary goals. Why we do what we do. On pages 6 and 7 of the booklet, we have something that IDEA requires that every state develops a state performance plan. And in California, they have to have indicators. And so California's performance plan says we are going to increase the graduation rate, decrease the dropout rate, be in compliance with federal IEP guidelines, and improve outcomes, education and post-secondary education and training. So one of the things that happened is that for several years, there was a real focus on that compliance piece. How do we fill out this IEP form so every I is dotted, every T is crossed, and we're okay? If people come and audit our records, they say, yep, you did it all. And so these are the 8 criteria. There's an appropriate measurable goal in each area. The measurable goals are updated annually. There's evidence of age-appropriate assessment. Transition services in the IEP are listed. Transition services include a course of study. There are annual goals. There's evidence the student was invited to the IEP meeting, and if appropriate, there's evidence that a representative from an agency was invited to the IEP meeting. So that's compliance. But you and I both know that you can write a beautiful piece of paper, and if you're not doing transition, if you're not doing the best practices, if you're not implementing that IEP in ways that are meaningful to that student, then that IEP is a pretty piece of paper, but that's about it. And so one of the things that we did with the book is say, this is what you have to do, this is how to do it, so that we can achieve our outcomes. The other thing now, they said, okay, you know what, the federal government said, okay, we have beat you up with compliance and writing a clean IEP long enough. Now we're going to find out if you're doing it right, and we want to know what the outcomes are. And so they are asking the states to actually call school leavers and find out what they're doing within 1 year after they leave school. Now the good news is we're going to get a little bit of information. The bad news is, remember that emerging adulthood thing? That's going to be the year they take off to find themselves, or they might not have their act together and those kinds of things. So history tells us that the longer you start talking to them, even between the first year out and the second year out, there's a quantum difference in what they're doing. And maturity plays a huge role. But anyway, so as your student prepares to leave high school, you can expect a call or a survey of some kind, and they ask whether or not they are in higher education, and they define that as enrolled full-time or part-time, community college, college or university, and they've completed at least 1 term, or competitive employment, working at or above minimum wage, working in settings with others that are not disabled, and they are averaging at least 20 hours a week. That's the definition for competitive employment. There's other post-secondary education and training, and one of the things that we do have a tendency to do is say, oh, post-secondary education and training, that means college or university. The reality of it is the vast majority of training in this country happens on the business. They're employer provided. They go through apprenticeships. There is a whole pathway where you can take a vocational class, you can get an industry certification, and those kinds of things. So this is where you capture that other post-secondary education and training opportunity. And for many students, they're not ready to commit to a college environment, but they're perfectly willing to get some occupational certification. They're willing to do an apprenticeship program. They're willing to do something, and there are a lot of employers that put people through training on the work site. So that's where that's captured. And then other employment is when people are doing things, you know, sometimes when you're self-employed, you're not really earning minimum wage until you really get that business going. So that's captured there. Or if you're working on a farm and places like that. So there is other employment that may not make that minimum wage standard, but it is employment, okay? So when the person calls, and these are some suggestions, schools have a hard time getting a hold of people. And so if you're a parent, it would really be great if when you get a call, or your child gets a call, make sure they respond to the survey, because it really helps us gather the data. And with that data, we can see how to improve programs so that we do it even better so future kids have a shot at it, okay? Factors that lead to positive outcomes. There's another performance plan item, and it's indicator 17. And we know that if students stay in school, that if we implement an IEP using the very best of practices, and students work, they continue their education and training, they live independently, they graduate, all of those things lead to positive outcomes. So one of the things they're looking at is how do we structure what we're going to do with really looking at what indicator 17 is going to be, because the state has to tell the federal government how they're going to do a program improvement. We have some evidence. There is an organization called the National Secondary Technical Assistance Center, the National Secondary Transition Technical Assistance Center, and they have done extensive research. And the charts on these next 2 pages give us a little bit of that research. And it tells us that career awareness has a positive outcome in terms of in-school predictors of post-school outcomes. Career awareness has a positive implication in terms of education and employment. Occupational courses help. Paid employment and work experience go all the way across into education, employment, and independent living. Vocational education helps in education and employment. Work study, community experiences, exit exam for the diploma, inclusion in general ed, all of those things are positive indicators. So when you're sitting in a room and you're talking about the IEP, these are the things that make a difference for students. When we talk about post-secondary goals, and on page 12 of your booklet, we have a whole list of post-secondary kind of samples for post-secondary goals. So when you're talking about post-secondary goals, the ideal IEP would say after high school, I will attend Shasta College and earn a welding certificate. But it says what the behavior is, and it says when and how. And a lot of them are listed as the student or John or something. When it's in the I voice, it is the student's plan for their future, and it's nobody else's plan. And so that is the ideal to shoot for. The other thing that's important to know is that goals evolve over time. When you talk to that 15-year-old, they may not have done enough career exploration or anything. They may be able to say, I'll go to work. But by their time they're 16 or 17, maybe they'll say, I want to work as, and then it gets even more specific as they mature. And it's totally legitimate that every student at age 15 is not going to have that clearly defined post-secondary education goal and employment goal. You go through a process of learning enough about yourself and those kinds of things and learn about what opportunities are out there. And so developmentally, I will get a job, I will work as a carpenter, I will work full-time doing this, and you get greater degrees of specificity. Does that make sense? Career planning. This is a continuum. And goals, and that's why I say things should be more explicit as you mature. And when you are in, this chart has it from preschool, kindergarten, up to grade 4, you're really in an awareness. We used to do a really fun activity when we were working in school to career. Kindergartners would come in and they would have hats, and they would guess what occupation wore this hat. And it was just a way to help them get aware and do those kinds of things. So it can be developmentally appropriate as you go through school. But in career awareness, there are opportunities out there. There are things you can do. And then as you mature a little bit, you get into career exploration. And that's where students start doing a little bit more research, and they find out enough about themselves to say, you know, this might be something I would like to do. And then you get into the career practicum, and that's when you get into the work-based learning. You learn through working. You learn to work. And that's where you can participate in career technical education, or you can participate in volunteering, you can participate in workability and those kinds of things. And then you get into career preparation, where you're actually going through the post-secondary preparation for that career. So when you're talking about the child in the 7th grade, one of the questions to ask was, what kind of exploratory activities are available? How can we find out? And schools can do a lot of career exploration in the classroom. Computers have a wealth of resources on them. And you can also do it in the community. And even as a parent, when you go shopping or you take your child into the community, what kinds of jobs did you see in this store? What are people doing? Are there any of those things that you would like to do? So you can heighten their awareness that there are lots of possibilities out there. SCANS is a report that was written in 1992, and it's the Secondaries Commission on Achieving Necessary Skills. It was written by the Department of Labor, and it said these are essential employability skills that you need for every single job. And the SCANS skills have withstood the test of time, and they're still a foundation to a lot of the career technical education programs. And they've been upgraded a little bit, and they're called the skills for the 21st century, but they're basically the same skills. One of the things that is a good idea is when you're talking about doing transition and the IEP, start with the career goal in mind first. Because if you start with careers kind of give you a clue about what kind of educational goal to set. This is a resource called My Next Move, and it's available online for free, and it is associated with a system called ONET, the Occupational Information Network, that has every job, and you go to ONET and you get information about a job, but it's 16 pages, and who wants to read that much? They made this, My Next Move, a little bit more fun, user-friendly. But first of all, this is the first page of ONET, and you can see where I put searching careers with keywords. I put animals. I just want to work with animals. So when you say search, the second page comes up with a whole bunch of possibilities of what you can do if you're interested in working with animals. And I chose something about being a groomer. And this is what it tells you. It tells you what you do. It tells you what you would do on the job, what knowledge you need, what skills you need, what abilities you need, what personality traits are really good for that kind of work. And it tells you what level of education and what the job outlook is. And below that job outlook, there's another thing that you can check that says, how many of these jobs are in my community? And you can put your zip code in, and it comes up with it. One of the things I did when I was doing some research for a person I was working with was to say, okay, you really want to be a dog groomer, where can we get that training? So Petco came up, and they have an apprenticeship dog grooming training program. And so we found out that employer has those opportunities available. So use things outside of, this is for everybody, okay? So now we're going to talk about assessment. And student-centered transition requires that we think about the students' hopes, dreams, their interests, their plans for the future. And we really need to think, whose plan is it? And there are a lot of times that I've attended IEP meetings and the student is absent or the student doesn't want to be there and that kind of thing. And you're thinking, whose plan is this? The student voice needs to be present. But we're going to talk a little bit about transition assessments. And when we talk about transition assessments, the first thing that comes to mind are career types of assessments. What kind of work do they want to do? What kind of education do they need? But there's another side to assessing transition, and those are the readiness issues. What about the readiness to transition, the life skills, housing, transportation, money, eligibility for support services? All of those are part of how we should look at assessing the students' readiness and their needs. The purpose of assessment, first of all, the assessment should be a guided process that gives the students some insights into themselves. And it should be something that helps that student develop an awareness. and to take charge of the process. And there should be a connection between assessment and post-secondary. All of this should fit together like gears that mesh. Okay? When we talk about career assessment, it's designed to assist the students, and one of the things we talk about a lot is the portfolio, and a lot of schools have transition portfolios. And the real focus should be on the students' strengths and their aptitudes and their interest and their passion. And if they struggle with something, that just means you don't set them up in a job where you have to use a skill. I mean, I wasn't good in math until I became an administrator. Then I got good in math. But anyway, I wasn't particularly good in math, so I avoided jobs that required math. And the same is true. If your child has difficulty with some aspect of some of these job skills, you really have to do the job carving, and you really have to look at where those strengths are and where those abilities are and match so those things are something they use on the job. But you think about their dreams for the future, you think about their interests, you think about their talents, their skills, their learning style, their positive personality traits, and their preferences. Do they want to work indoors or outdoors? Do they want to work with people, or do they kind of want to work independently? And those kinds of things. This is an example from I'm Determined of a very simple summary of putting a collage together or putting some information together. And this would be appropriate for any student. But it talks about interests, talks about what they want you, he wants you to know about him, what his learning style is, what kinds of accommodations work for me. And it just helps him. His name is John Tyler, and he's interested in criminal justice. And it just tells him a little bit about himself. So you know that this person has been putting some thought into it. There have been a process to learn these things about myself, and that's kind of where we want students to go. Multiple intelligences really gives us some clues about where the students' strengths are, where their aptitudes are, and it's based on this is something I'm good at and this is something I like. And it also gives us a clue into learning styles as well. When we think about setting goals, it's important to know that things have changed a lot. When I started doing counseling with students, it was kind of a, okay, you've taken this assessment, it tells me you want this career, and you're just going to stay in that career. And this is the career choice. And you can't do that anymore. And then they started saying, okay, we're going to climb career ladders. And then it was, okay, I'm going to get some education and training, and I'm going to enter a career, but I'm going to get some more training so I can continue or move up, or I can get into a related career and that kind of thing. Now, it's almost like climbing a jungle gym, or taking advantage of an opportunity. And now, we don't know what jobs are going to be out there. Technology has affected the job market so that we don't know what jobs are going to be there. Or for those jobs that we know are going to be there, we don't know how they're going to be done. For example, manufacturing. Now we have the 3D printers. So it's changed the way we even do that in engineering. So everything is constantly impacted by the changes that happen with technology. And so one of the things you have to look at is when I work at something, even if I'm doing a part-time job while I'm in school, I'm gaining some skills. I'm gaining some contacts. I'm gaining some references. I'm developing some experiences and some certifications. And I'm developing a sense of confidence. I'm holding down a job. I guess I can work. And then you bundle those things and you take them to your next opportunity and you expand that list of things. And sometimes you're going laterally on that playground, and sometimes you're climbing up and then going back down. Recently, my daughter, the one that's still the emerging adult, was looking for a job. And so she decided that she was going to develop a resume that said, this is the kind of work I want to do. These are my skills. This is related experience to prove I had the skills. Give me a call. And she gets inundated with phone calls. And I thought she was a little crazy, but she might be onto something. doesn't listen to mom all that well. But anyway, the point is that as students develop these experiences, they have something to take with them to that next environment, and they add to that list of experiences and the skills and those kinds of things. But we don't know what that job market's going to look like, so we want them to do what they love, do what they're good at, and do something somebody will pay them to do. When we talk about assessments, there's some real challenges because you have to do something that's age and grade appropriate. You have to do something, and sometimes students are not ready to respond. There is one assessment tool that says, do you like it a little? Do you like it a little? Do you like it a whole bunch? Like it a little? It's okay. Hate it a little, hate it a lot. Kids hated those kinds of things. And if they don't have any experiences that they've related to, they're going to say, nope, don't like any of it. Thank you very much. And so it really has to be relevant to what the students' experiences are. And when they get hit with the term assessment, they say, I don't want to take another test. And so there are ways of integrating these things into curriculum. There's a way of, some of the schools have 9th grade personal growth where they do some of these things. And, and you can take that curriculum and modify it to some degree. There are lots of ways, and they love computers, and there are some wonderful online assessments. So what we have to do, too, is be really concerned about the language and the vocabulary. And if they don't think they can do it, if they don't know what it is you're talking about, they're going to say nope. And if they don't think they can do it, they're going to say no. And so you really have to find out where the student is, and you have to give them the assessments that are relevant to them. There's a wonderful website called What Can You Do? Campaign, and it really talks about how you inspire kids to think about their future. One of the things that you must have on the IEP is you must have services. Transition services beginning not later than the first IEP must include measurable post-secondary goals and a list of services that help the students achieve those goals. So right now, this is the list of the kinds of transition services that schools use. College awareness, vocational assessments, guidance, career assessment, career awareness, self-advocacy, career planning, job coaching, mentoring, sustaining coaching, agency linkages. Those are the services in case miss that typically relate to transition. So those are the kinds you'll find the schools talking about at the IEPs. There should be, for every goal area, there should at least be one service listed. And the most effective strategies are the career awareness, the community experiences, the inclusion in general ed, employment, work experience, integrated work, and building connections. That's what all the research really says are the most critical kinds of services we need. Employment first. One of the things in employment first, and this is not in there, is things like person-centered planning. And now some legislation is talking about work-based learning brokers that negotiate with the community to find work experience opportunities and volunteer experiences for kids. They're recommending that students participate in 2 trial work experience opportunities, can be paid or unpaid, and that you have a situational assessment. We did a situational assessment on a student once, and he said where he wanted to work. He wanted to work at Caltrans, and we said, okay, we'll put you at Caltrans. And he worked at Caltrans, and he hated it. And he hid, literally, and he wouldn't do the work. And we said, well, you don't really like working at Caltrans. Let's try you at a restaurant. And at the restaurant, he was social, and he was friendly, he was outgoing, he did the work, he did everything. And then we said, okay, what kind of career do you want? He said, Caltrans. Okay, we tried that and it didn't work. Well, his family had said working at Caltrans would give you a really good job. And so when you're talking to students, and any student, about career interests, you really need to figure out what there is about the job or why they want that job. A lot of times terminology, like they'll say, oh, I want to be a veterinarian. And you say, really? You like giving shots to animals? Oh, no, I wouldn't do that. And what they're really talking about is they want to work with pets. They want to work with animals in a different category, but that's the term that comes to the head when they're thinking animal job. And so we really have to be careful about that kind of thing. And the situational assessments help us find out the difference between a stated interest and an observed interest, and their behaviors that indicate, oh, I really like this. Course of study. The course of study is on page 18. And a course of study is a multi-year description of coursework to achieve the student's post-secondary goal from the current year to the anticipated year they leave school. So it should be a list of classes they are going to take. And there's some things that we really, and first of all, a transcript is not a course of study, because the transcript typically tells you what the student has already taken and what grades they've earned. And this says what are the classes you're going to take from today until the day you leave school. So the other thing is that the course of study must intentionally and explicitly reflect the student's goals and interests. And students who earn the diploma must meet the state and district graduation requirements. And finally, student progress, grades, the classes they take, attendance, credit status should be monitored fairly closely. This is an example of our, and it's not in the booklet, but at Enterprise High School in Reading, the counselors got together. Counselors don't call it a course of study. That's a special ed term. Counselors call it a four-year plan or a career and education plan. But this one shows you how the post-school, post-high school plans are listed. They've got the list of what you have to take to earn the diploma on the form. And then the classes are populated. And so when it gets to the bottom where it's talking about electives, all the electives that are available are pulled down. And so the student can actually go in and click on which elective they want. So if you're really interested in working in a specific field, those electives are what will really, you know, if you really are interested in something having to do with animals, working in agriculture would be closely tied to that. And so this is an example of a four-year plan that a school counselor would work with a student. And all you have to do is go down the hall and get the four-year plan and bring it back and attach it to the IEP and say that this four-year plan is attached to the IEP. For the certificate of completion, that's not defined in Ed Code. It's not defined anywhere. And so the certificate of completion are just alternatives to the diploma. And the course of study that leads to the certificate should still be a list of courses you take. And the Ed Code just says complete a prescribed alternative course of study, meet IEP goals and objectives, and satisfactorily attend and participate in instruction. And the certificate of completion is defined by the district. And one of the things is that we really need to work with the districts to make sure they are preparatory to the next environment in the same way the high school diploma is a ticket to the next environment. And these are some of the things that you see are typical kinds of classes that somebody would be taking if they're going for a certificate of completion. Annual goals. Annual goals are just that, they're annual goals. The post-secondary goal is measurable statement about what the student is going to do when they leave school. The annual goal is what we're going to work on this year to help you prepare for that post-secondary goal. And as you look, this is what we did in Shasta County, and this is not in the book, but it's going to be on the website, so you'll have reference to it. But we pulled a whole group of teachers together from the different schools in Shasta County, and we said, what do kids need to know and do? And so we came up with a list of things that students need to know and do, and then we categorized them by education, employment, and independent living. And once we did that, we said, okay, let's take every topic and let's tie it to the Common Core anchor standards and to a thing called Bloom's taxonomy. And Bloom's taxonomy is what the Smarter Balance Assessment System that California has adopted addresses. And so we said, all right, we got that, and this is what it looks like when it's mapped. So if you're going to state your career plan, you have to summarize the research you did, you have to create your course of study, you have to demonstrate self-determination skills, and you have to present the plan. And you need to be able to speak, you need to present knowledge and ideas, you need to use language, and in your portfolio, you might have a written plan. You might have a PowerPoint presentation. You might have a statement in an interview that somebody transcribes for you. You might use assistive technology. So the assessment piece is different, but having a plan is the same. Does that make sense? And so this is how we tied transition and Common Core standards and what a transition portfolio should include together. The next part that we're going to talk about is the student involvement in the IEP. And that is on pages 22 and 23. And schools are required to invite the student to attend the IEP. And the question we ask is, who's the VIP at your IEP? And we really need to try and get the students there. And what is your experience? What do you see in the future? What is your role? How can you help people be engaged? And you know what? Not all students want to be there. You've got the student input is provided. You can interview the student. You can take the information to the IEP. And you can share the student's information, so they've indirectly contributed. Or the student's in the room, but the eyes are down, and don't you dare ask me a question. Or the student is a reluctant participant. They'll respond reluctantly to the questions you direct at them. Or the student is a self-advocate. This is what I want to do, this is what I need. Or the student leads the IEP. We've got some programs where the student makes the choice of who should be invited to the meeting. They are the ones that send out the invitations to the meeting, and they have the training and the background to be able to present their portfolio and to say, this is what I need for next year. And so but we really need to prepare them and train them to be able to achieve that kind of thing. And if you are a self-advocate, you know your strengths, you know your needs, you identify your personal goals, you know your rights and responsibilities, and you communicate to others. And when you think about it, how many places do you need to be able to present that information? If you go to the Department of Rehabilitation and ask for services and they say, do you have a disability? And you say no, you don't have any services. And if you're going to seek accommodations, you need to be able to express what accommodations you need. And there's a whole thing about disclosing the disability, and there are pros and cons to doing it. There's no legal requirement that when you're going through an interview with a job and you don't need an accommodation for it, that you even mention your disability. But if you're going to need an accommodation and that becomes apparent after you're hired, then you have to disclose a disability to qualify for accommodations. If you go to the Disability Student Services at the college and you say, no, I don't have a disability, I just need a note taker, they're not going to give you a note taker. So it's really critical that we help the students understand their strengths and where they need some help and how to ask for it. And sometimes my daughter, poor kid, I'm really picking on her tonight, but my daughter has an auditory processing delay. And she was in high school, and for some reason she decided she wanted to work at a radio station and get involved with the media. And so she had to learn all of the board and all the equipment. And she didn't go in and say, I have an auditory processing delay, blah, 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 blah. She just said, you know what, I learn quicker if you show me, and I can give it a try, and then you can tell me what I need to know. And that's how she handled it, and nobody had a problem with it. So there are subtle ways that you can get the information without disclosing. And if you have some problem where you can't lift 100 pounds, don't get a job where you have to lift 100 pounds. There's some common sense here. And so, you know, but when you need an accommodation, you need to be able to express why you need the accommodation. And ADA, the Americans with Disabilities Act, takes a look at it in terms of the Department of Rehabilitation's definition of disability, not the school district's definition. Okay. And the IEP can be a learning experience to help the students develop those skills that they're going to need to advocate for a job for themselves, or to advocate for accommodations where they go, or to advocate for services and everything. It can be used as a terrific learning tool. And the challenge is the students avoid the IEP, or sometimes parents don't want them to attend, and sometimes that can be dealt with by saying, let's let them come in and introduce themselves, say what they want, and then they can leave the meeting and we can go on with the meeting. There are ways to handle those kinds of things. Or we make the mistake of talking about the student at the IEP, not to the student at the IEP. And that again goes to expectations and training and preparation for the student in advance of the IEP, and having them do a limited role and then gain skills and confidence and have them do a little bit more every time they have an IEP meeting. The other thing is we have to invite agencies to attend the IEP. Now the trick here is you have to invite them, but they don't have to come. But you need to have a piece of paper in the file that said you invited them. And there's some real challenges. The most commonly invited agencies are the Department of Rehabilitation and Regional Center. But agencies are not required to attend the IEP. And some agencies set grade levels. You know, we only want to go to the IEP during their last year of school. And some people are working with lots of agencies in their community with mental health or with juvenile justice and those kinds of things. So it's totally appropriate for that group of people. The agency cannot be invited unless the parent gives permission for the agency to be there. And there's a huge difference between working within the K-12 system and working after they get out of the K-12 system. You know, when we talk about accommodations, that's just naturally provided within the school, but when they get out of school, they have to ask for them if they want them. Agencies can have waiting lists. Agencies can say, this is our menu of services. If you don't want any of those services, we don't have to serve you. And schools have to serve everybody. So it's a whole new world when people leave school and you have to cope with those adult agencies. But there is a whole different set of rules when you're dealing with agencies. They can have waiting lists. Schools cannot have waiting lists. They are not mandated to serve everybody that qualifies for their services. They'll put up, sometimes it appears to be artificial barriers. Well, they missed their appointment, so we didn't bother enrolling them or putting them in plan and things like that. So it is a real challenge once you get out of school. And then the lack of agencies in rural environments is a real challenge. So if you live in a community where there just is no agency, you have to go to the closest one because usually they have regional offices. So you have to go to the closest one and say, how are you going to provide? I live in Redding, and some of those mountainous communities just don't have a lot of resources. So the agencies say, well, there's no jobs where you live. Well, then help the student get to school so they can get some jobs someplace else, and that kind of thing. So you really have to be an advocate and find a way to work with them. The other thing is that there are programs where it's not necessary for them to be at the IEP because they're involved with things way before the IEP. Department of Rehab might have a transition partnership program, and they may have a student in plan before the IEP happens. So making sure that those notations are made. Our community college doesn't go to the IEPs, but they do orientations at night for parents. They do student orientations. They have a field trip for all the juniors to go to the campus and look at what's out there. And as seniors, they have the whole process for signing them up for classes and everything. So they do a great deal in the area of transition. They just don't do it at the IEP meeting. It's probably more important they do it than attend the IEP. And so the schools just need to make sure that they've got them linked into those services and that they've noted what those services are. Okay? And parents are not in here. Do you know that all of this, and there's not one word about parents, but we throw it in anyway because parents are absolutely essential to the IEP process. And, you know, we provide some support to help students prepare to transition, but once they step out that door into transition, it is the role of the parent to provide that support, or family members or other supportive adults to coach them, to mentor them, to argue with them, and to really help them make the right decisions. And so we really need to make sure that parents understand what those adult services are, how to access those adult services. That's the only way kids are really going to have a seamless transition to what we've got. And they really need to have people in their lives that will provide that supportive role, because they're emerging adults too. Okay? And we need to engage families. And my parents, my adults are my parents, friends, and coworkers who I work with. When I need help, I can go to my adult allies. And that's what every student needs. And in conclusion, transition is a process. It's not an IEP. It's documented in the IEP. And meeting the mandate does not achieve outcomes unless there's quality transition activities happening as they go through school. It's a tool to address preparation, and the essential voices at the IEP that need to be heard loud and clear are the students. And ultimately, parents are essential to that transition process, and the entire transition team needs to help the students develop hope, confidence, and trust.
The UC Davis Mind Institute was created in 1998 with a promise to find cures for neurodevelopmental disorders. Every day, our physicians and researchers come closer to fulfilling that promise. Their groundbreaking research on autism, Fragile X syndrome, chromosome 22q11.2 deletion syndrome, ADHD, and other brain disorders are helping children achieve their fullest potential. Please visit our website to find out more about current studies, upcoming events, and how you can help make a difference.
is going to be coming and doing a 2-hour like Sue did on just the component of transition assessment and giving more tools and resources and examples of transition assessment. We also have Gina Grecian from the Ralph Family Empowerment Center coming to talk more about transition, post-secondary goals, as well as services. And she's going to do a full 2-hour workshop on student involvement in the IEP and student-led IEPs. So that will be a great opportunity for you to learn more about those topics. The dates and details are still forthcoming, but do know that that is our plan. We anticipate that happening within the next 2 months. Adult services, always a big question, and I heard in the introductions and why you came, a lot of you have questions about what are the services that are out there after high school or after age 22 when you're a youth or when you yourself leave the education system. So we're going to be doing some panel discussions and presentations about colleges, post-secondary education options, living options, and employment options. So I think in the series of community trainings we're planning on doing, we should be able to address a lot more in depth and in detail some of these questions that you have. But if you have individual questions and really want some more follow-up, we have these sheets that we're going to pass around. And for family members in particular, I don't want to say professionals that are here can't fill them out. In fact, I want to hear from you. But our intention is through our resource center here at the Mind Institute to be able to contact families with their follow-up questions and provide some more personalized information and support to you. So we'll pass these around and give you an opportunity to write down specific questions and needs on these, and we'll collect them as we leave. We also do have an evaluation. The feedback that we get from you as a community on opportunities like this is really important to us. And so before you leave, we do want you to complete an evaluation on this activity for us. And with that, we do have some time for questions. So if there are any questions for Sue about any of the content covered, any resources that she might be able to share with you and help you with.
Well, this is actually a question for you. The following workshops, are you going to send out emails to all the people
Yes.
who signed up?
Yes. If you registered for this workshop and we have your email, you'll get a notification. Also, and I mentioned this earlier, if you're friends with the Mind Institute on Facebook, the notifications always go up there. It's how I find out a lot what's going on. And if you're not, then be a friend. Any questions for Sue? Yes.
I just have a comment that
If you're leaving, please do so quietly so we can hear questions. Thank you.
for kids that are high functioning and they're college bound, a lot of times the transition plan just says going to college. And so then they skip all the living independently and the life skills, getting ready to meet that's a comment. Because then they get through college and they haven't had any of that, so they got a degree, but they don't have.
Actually, there are 2 reasons that students drop out of college, and it frequently happens within the first semester. One of them is not having an identified career goal, so they don't know why they're there. The second thing is it's a very confusing environment, and if they don't have the life skills, they bail. And they come back home and regroup. And so those are the 2 factors, and it's just as important for a student who is thinking about going on to a college or a university to have a career goal in mind so that they have a reason to be there and they have a rationale for choosing classes and everything else. So it's important. And those life skills are just a real challenge because a lot of schools used to have senior living skills and stuff like that, and a lot of them have gone away. But there's a growing need and a growing concern around life skills. And when you look at that chart, every student in the school system needs some life skills.
Oh, yeah.
So, okay. Yes?
Is there more information about conservatorships versus power of attorneys and things like that? Our son turns 18 next month. We've got some information from the regional center, and it's just right now we're, you know, because he is high functioning, but he also has a medical condition, so I don't want his his mental deficits to overcome his medical needs.
Right, right.
So, do we need to then to be an advocate for him, but yet help him with some of these other side decisions? And, I read through the information and it's just like,
Yeah, it's legalese, isn't it?
it's not fun.
It's really a struggle. And that's really not a question. I don't have a legal background, so I don't have the expertise to answer. But are there any advocates that deal with that here in this area?
What was the question?
Legal conservatorship.
I do. I have an answer.
Okay.
I'm not a lawyer, so consult your own lawyer with this. I happen to know that the Supported Life Institute is having a Supported Life Conference October 8th, 9th, and 10th at the Lionsgate Hotel. And one of the topics during the Supported Life Conference addresses your question about do we want a full conservatorship? Do we want partial conservatorship? Do we want power of attorney? Or what type of legal support do we want for ourselves and our son as we go through the adult life transition?
So Supported Life
Institute.
This flyer is in the back of the room. It's a conservatorship, public benefits, and trust planning. That was at the table in the back. Sure.
Okay. Are there any other questions? Yes.
What was the question? I'm an advocate and a parent as well, but I couldn't hear what the question was.
Apologies.
It was about conservatorship.
Was it about like Alta?
Well, how do we help our children transition into adulthood when they're high functioning? At what level of legal support do we have as a parent? Because when they turn 18, they're 18. And my son has a mental and physical disability. So I need to make sure that his mental deficits don't overcome his physical needs and medical necessities to help him, keep healthy.
Yeah, I have a handout too that I can give you before we leave. It's an email form that I can email it to you.
Perfect, thank you.
Yes.
I would say that's a really important question because a lot of our kids are impacted in many ways. And there are alternatives to conservatorship. Supported Life Institute is a really great place to learn about that. Also, Regional Center has information on conservatorships and alternatives to conservatorship because we're aging too and we might have to write for our children to take care of our medical needs as well. And there's legal ways to do that. And it's not all conservatorship, but Alta has paperwork, ask your worker for that.
I have that, I've read through it, it's a lot of
And go to
confusion.
this workshop, this is the place that she told you about.
Great. Good.
Thank you.
Well, another good thing, one of the things that is helpful, because there's been many, many transitions, some rocky, some good, the whole gamut, is for, and I am now a parent with a recent IEP for a student, so I've got the kind of the high functioning real issues there. And the thing that I tried to build with my student and with that you have beyond that piece is making sure that you're helping to build that together with your student, because when you have clashes with that, it's this judgment of you got a teenager who's going to sink their feet in and they're just going to resist more, so
Because I say
working
so.
on that together, and I've told my daughter, she's 14, no, I am not going to email the teacher for this. If you have to resolve this, if you want to look at doing that, and this is what you want changed, this is what you need to do. I'll support you with it, quote unquote, last week, but I'm not going to, I'm not going to do that for you. This is for you to learn how to do that, because you're going to have to learn to do it as an adult. So flat out working that with your students. So when you do get to that point, you can work, you can work together and help the kid.
We started with that. It was, this is what you need to do. I can contact your faculty at 4 years ago or whatever. Now it's like, all right, if you need clarification, you need to school loop them. you know, here you go.
No, you're gonna go do this. It's up to you.
Okay, well, thank you so much for coming. I enjoyed interacting with you tonight, and go home and have some dinner. Thank you.